Well, hello there, everybody, and welcome to Adventures in History. And I hope that you're having a wonderful, whatever time it is in your time zone, day, brunch, too early in the morning, held over from yesterday. Who knows what time it is wherever you are. But I hope that you're enjoying yourselves, and I hope that something pleasant has happened to you today. It's been an interesting day for me. Work, the internet stuff at work is crazy. Systems going down in the middle of final exam time. Just generally not a good time for a system to go down in the middle of wrapping up classes and having to do grades and put stuff into the system for the system to go down. Anyway, you know how that goes. Yeah, hope everybody's doing okay. I'm doing okay. Doing okay. Tired, but part of that is because I'm fighting off sinus stuff. Have a kind of a recurring sinus infection thing going on. What's up, Cliff? You have fruitcake. Hey. Fruitcake can either be really good and tasty, or it can be that thing that nobody really wants, and there's a whole bunch of it left over. It's very interesting how that usually works out. It's one or the other. There's very rarely an experience that I've had with a fruitcake where I was just like, eh. Right? Usually it's like, oh man, that's a good fruitcake, or no thanks. But I hope you're doing well, Cliff. And DCI Banks, what's going on? Welcome, welcome. We're about to go. We're about to go. Yeah. I don't know. Dead zone. Kind of fuzzy. It's okay. I do need to, I guess, make a little bit of an announcement. I'll probably have to repeat this at the end because Gina. Because I don't know how many people are around. Next week, I will be out of town on Thursday. So we are going to do Thursday on Tuesday. So normally next week would not have a Tuesday stream because we did a viewer request this week. But I'm going to be out of town. I'm also not going to be able to stream the weekend. This weekend probably, like, I'll try to stream Saturday or maybe Sunday afternoon. But like the following week, which is the I think that's the 16th and the 17th. I'm going to be out of town as well. Is German Christmas stolen in the form of little cookie-like lumps stuffed with marzipan? Dude, okay, yeah. I do love me some marzipan. I will eat marzipan pretty much just like in a chunk, right? If you could just give me marzipan like here, and I would eat it. I love it. I love it. The last time that the three mods went out, so like myself and Mac in a lab coat and Kilted Preacher, we went to, like, on a day trip back over the I think it was August. We went to this, like, supposedly it's called World Market, right? And it was supposed to have all these fancy foods from all over the place. And one of the things that was on the clearance rack was this, I don't know, it's about yay wide or yay long bar of dark chocolate covered marzipan. And I said, yes, I'll be having you, because it was very cheap. It was like $1. And things being $1 now are like almost impossible to find. Everything now is inflated. What's up, Cave Geek? Have I tried bien mesabe? The word does not look familiar. Let me put this into the Google and see if it pulls up anything that I'm familiar with. So this is a sort of, well, I guess I can share here, huh? So we're looking up bien me sabe, which is a sweet Spanish dessert prepared with honey, egg yolk, ground almonds. Prepared with honey, egg almonds, probably consistently varies upon its popular cuisine in the Canary Islands. Interesting. That's cool. Has been described as influenced by Moorish culture. Well, that's the almond influence, right? Several variations exist. Additional ingredients: lemon zest. Ooh, cinnamon. That I could, yeah. I'm gonna have to try this. I have not had it myself, but it sounds delicious. It's this particular version here from Puerto Rico sounds almost like like a Puerto Rican version of a tiramisu. Huh. Interesting. Almonds are not my favorite, so Stollen and Bien Mensabe are out. That's fair. Almonds, on the big scheme of a fruit of the tree, or nuts as you might call them, are not my favorite. I would much prefer a walnut or a pecan. I'm a big fan of macadamia nut. It's semi-liquid Spanish marzipan to put on bread. Okay, now that sounds like lots of things that I would love. Cave Geek is eating dinner. You get it as a spread to put on bread. Interesting. Pistachios are greater than all nuts. I do quite like pistachios, both in the inclusion in dessert world, but also just by themselves. I was actually talking with my wife a couple of weeks ago about how much I really enjoyed pistachios as a kid, and specifically pistachio pudding, which I probably have not had pistachio pudding in 30 years. But I'm interested to sort of try it to see if it would be as good as I remember it being. It could also just be that because I was growing up, and at the time that I was growing up, we didn't really have a lot of disposable income, so we got treated every now and then to something like, 50-cent pudding. And that was a big treat. Maybe that nostalgia factor is what's kicking in here, but I remember distinctly really, really liking pistachio pudding. Hazelnuts and almonds are the worst nuts. Hazelnuts they're okay, but if I want something that's flavored like hazelnut, I actually want to eat the nut. There's a lot of stuff out there that's hazelnut flavored, like coffee or syrup or stuff like that, that I just don't think tastes accurate. So if I want hazelnuts, I want to eat an actual hazelnut. Cashews trump pistachios. That's a bold claim, Cave. Cashews trump pistachios. I don't know about that, man. I don't know about that. What's crazy though is I can't necessarily say that pistachios are better than cashews. Perhaps they're actually tied in my head. It's rare that things actually tie. You can't eat macadamia. You get the swollen. Yeah, allergies are for real. Pistachio ice cream is where it's at. I don't know if I've ever had any pistachio ice cream. I have to try to find some of that. Anyway, we all know that if you get Shane talking about food, he will continue to talk about food until the end of the time that he would normally stream. So I should probably take the opportunity to actually talk a little bit about, like history stuff, I guess. But let me say hey to everybody. Frank Big Time, what's going on, man? Aloha. Good to see you. Hope you're having a good one. We don't have a Costco around me, so I can't buy 3-pound bags of pistachios. Pecan bars are legit. What's up, Moose? Good to see you, my friend. By cashews trump pistachios, he means cashews are a completely incompetent and reactionary substitute for pistachios. That's very clever, and I appreciate that on multiple levels. Well done, sir. That was a good one. You get the clap. I need a. That's what I need. The next animated emoji should just be a slow clap. Because goodness knows we have enough really bad jokes here. I guess I should change this header to, instead of just regular China, to like Song Dynasty, which is actually what we're going to be talking about for the duration of the stream tonight. All right, so where we last left China, which was literally months ago, months and months ago, so far back that I don't even remember the last time we talked about China. We had ended a period of time called the Five Kingdoms period, and one big dynasty. I'm going to have to do a full recap. I can point you to the VOD. That's why I keep the VODs. We had done this really big consolidation under a dynasty called the Song. And if we look at where we sort of left them around the year 1000, they had put together China. And China had been separated for quite some time. And so the concept of reunifying China under a single dynasty was one that was a rather significant feat. So the Tibetan kingdoms here that you see are actually smaller than the old Tibetan Empire. Back in the late 700s and into the 800s, Tibet was a unified kingdom that controlled a huge selection of territory that would have included a lot of this part, some of what at this time was Western China, all the way down here to the Ganges River Basin, so bordered the Indian Ocean, and a lot of this stuff here in Central Asia. Tibetans had a lot of power, and their empire was very big for about 200 years and incredibly influential, and then it fell apart, mostly because of internal politics being sketchy and just the sheer problem of communicating and transporting armies and things like that over such a big, vast area. And what we see looking at right here, this big chunk that just says Tibetan Kingdoms, is a vacillating rotation of about 9 or 10 smaller little political units that are all mostly, well, I can't say all mostly. Many of them are mostly ethnic Tibetans. Some of the smaller kingdoms had admixtures of external ethnic groups, especially the ones that are here in the north, especially like these that would have been right around in here. But they're not stable, and they're not necessarily, they're definitely not unified. We have been mentioning them sort of on and off. It's difficult to know exactly what was going on in Tibet at that period of time. This would be, like if we're looking at this picture right now, this is from the year 1000. We don't necessarily have the world's best sources from Tibet during that period. A lot of this is because the internal politics was just very, very unstable. And when you have big central instability, you don't always have people that are going to devote their lives to things like writing down histories. We live in a time today where I am incredibly lucky that I can make a living, albeit a limited one, off of just sort of learning stuff, right? If I were in the ancient world, I would have a much harder time getting by. I would probably have joined up into the military as a person from a lower rank, and if I were to achieve any sort of greatness, it would be probably moving around groups of people as a proxy power for somebody else that's actually ruling. But we're talking about the Song dynasty here, which is quite large and was put back together after the collapse of the Tang dynasty, which fell apart rather catastrophically in the late 800s and early 900s, and reunified then under the Song. Now, a couple of other people that are going to be sort of tangentially important to the discussion here are the Goryeo. We did talk about them last Thursday. This is the unified kingdom of Korea at the time, and the Liao dynasty here, who were ethnically ruled by a group called the Khitans. Now, it's fair to point out that the Liao dynasty is not a homogenous ethnic group. They weren't all just one people. There were about a dozen different ethnic groups up in that region, including a group called the Jurchen, which would play a role, and we'll talk about them in just a little bit. Who's keeping history now? Do you mean currently now, or do you mean contemporaneously with the Song dynasty as now? Song dynasty has a substantial amount of written records. They are incredibly good at writing stuff down. So, currently now all over. There are historians that are working to sort of, chart the trajectory of things. It's a little bit easier because, as Cliff sort of hints at here, there's a lot of stuff that's really, really easy for historians to access because of just the massive amounts of data that's available. A lot of the stuff that we will call history won't be written until probably a good 20 years from now. There are people now that are writing things like textbooks that are starting to try to shape the narrative of what like the last decade looked like, back in the 2010s. There are always going to be historical additions to, like, the textbook that the history teachers use at my college goes all the way up until the end of President Trump's term, so all the way through 2020. So that's pretty recent, and the stuff that's being put in those now is going to go through multiple different changes. It's going to take a little bit of time to settle, and this sounds like history gets made up, and to a certain extent it does, but the first time history is written down is not very frequently the way that it stays. It takes a little bit of time for people to argue things out. So imagine, like, if you're familiar with miso soup, right? When you first make miso soup and you pour it in the bowl, it's very cloudy. And if you leave it sitting there for a while, it will eventually start getting more clear, and it eventually will condensate down to the bottom. And then you have just like basically clear broth, and then the miso that's, a disparate paste that's been spread out through the broth that sort of collects down at the bottom. Written history works a lot like that. You'll have somebody write something, and then it's very cloudy because people will argue about it and argue about it and argue about it. And eventually things will become more clear, and eventually it will sort of move into a settled history phase. Now, that doesn't mean that we should leave it that way. We should always be open to the consideration that our interpretation of history has been biased or wrong or incomplete based on data or archaeological evidence and things like that. And so sometimes every now and then somebody will go back and kind of stir the soup again and cloud everything back up. But I actually enjoy that. I think that it's good. I think that it's healthy. You can question things and come to the same conclusion that you were at prior to the questioning, and actually benefit from the questioning even if you don't actually change your mind. And I think it's perfectly good for academics to do that. And far too often, what ends up happening is people will make up their mind that this is settled history, and then they don't want anybody to go back and stir the soup. They want everybody to just leave it alone. I just read an article before I came on stream that the Texas Historical Society has removed books about slavery from all of the antebellum sites that they control. So if you go to a house that was built before the Civil War in Texas, that was a slave plantation, and you go to the gift shop, you're not going to be able to buy a book about slavery anymore. And this is obviously because people are trying to, if we go back to our metaphor, people are trying to take away the spoon so that you can't stir the soup anymore, because they're happy with their interpretation of history, even though it's blatantly and obviously wrong, and they don't like the idea that people are going to learn more about it and then mess up their view. So that kid with that goat, dude. So if you all don't know what Raveland is talking about, hi Raveland. There's a GIF in the Discord, and there's just this little kid, and the kid is probably, I don't know, maybe 3, enough that they can speak in complete sentences. But the kid's like looking into the backyard, and there's a goat in the backyard. But the little kid has this really thick accent, and it's like, it's an effing goat. And it's like, no, it's just a goat. No, look, it's an effing goat. But he's not saying effing. It's just pure out F-bomb. And I laughed so hard at that little kid because, like, the accent by itself is cute, right? Any little kid talking with an accent is just automatically going to be cute. But the words, like it's an effing goat, like, it's so random. I don't know why it made me laugh so hard, but it's just so funny. I wonder if there should be some form of regulations on it, like an international historical society or something like that sort of gets to decide history. Maybe, but I wonder about the power that body would have after you made it, and specifically who would be on that committee, right? Are we going to put China on that committee? Because let me tell you, China's concept of history is not accurate. And even if we put somebody in America on that committee, are we going to pick somebody that is a slavery denier? Are we going to find somebody that thinks that there are benefits to slavery, and is that going to be America's representative to the Historical Commission? I don't know. I get the desire to apply some sort of regimented structure to the thing, and I agree that there should be some level of oversight, but I think that's peer review, and I think that's publication. What are you doing, Kaylee? We've been visited by the puppy. You want to see the puppy? Let me turn on the puppy cam. Look, it's a puppy. Hello. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Hello, Kaylee Poo. Oh yes, the pupper. Just loving the scritches. She was outside woofing a second ago. But you gotta be still. If you're not still, I can't. Oh, she currently. Don't look. She's exposing her nakedness. What are you doing? You gonna come back here? Gotta be still though, because if you're not still, I can't get the camera fixed on you. Now she's under the table. You want to come up here? You want to come right here? There you go. Where are you going? Oh, she's got itchies. Hey. Hey. Hey, be a lady. There you go. There's a good puppy shot. What are you doing? You go over there. You want to look right here? Trying to follow the dog around with the camera is kind of crazy. Oh yes. Do you want to give me some sugars? Oh, thank you. Oh yes. Oh, some sugars. Okay. Well, I'm supposed to be talking about history. You gonna itch some more? You're gonna go see Brittany? What? What? And there she goes. There's the puppy. Alright, catching back up. I would assume the first way it's written is biased, then it gets corrected into bias in a different direction. Yeah. That, Frank, that's pretty common what ends up happening. It's like the little perpetual motion balls. Like you pull one side this way and it releases, and then there's an over here, but at time it sort of settles down to the middle. There's more data now, so more possibility for manipulation. Absolutely, for sure. Yeah, hey, Moose. Yeah, it could be somebody from the Taliban that gets put on the committee, right? The viewers request a history of dogs. That's very, very broad. I don't know if I would want to do that. That's really involved. China. Anyway, we've got a big country. China's got to regulate all of this stuff. We're 30 minutes into the stream, and I've talked about China for like 5 minutes. We've had more puppy content than we've had China content. All right. Anyway, the Song Dynasty. By the time we get to the year 1000, they had been in control for about 40 years, and they need to start focusing on how to run this big chunk of country. And the infighting had become quite bad. And the biggest issue that we're going to keep running into time and time again is a noble family versus merchant family versus imperial family sort of argument thing. And there had been some big reforms at the early part of the Song Dynasty that attempted to limit stuff like accumulation of power over time. So things like power creep, especially for some of these larger noble families. And what it ended up doing, which is sort of an adverse effect that was unintended, was ministers that got into positions that were quite good at their job were getting run out because they had 3-year term limits, which was a good idea to begin with. But the central authority was having to spend almost as much time training people to do these positions as people were actually doing the job themselves. So one of the things that starts happening is a bit of an attempt at handling these internal issues. And some of this is going to start with basically making competency benchmarks. So if you get one of these jobs, it's a bureaucrat, middle manager, small scale governor of a tiny little province, or paper pusher person or something like that, your competency is going to be based on things like, did you get the job done? Did you collect all your taxes? Did you get, things like job reviews that are positive, et cetera, et cetera. And if you get good reviews, they actually relax some of these laws that put term limits on you and let you hang around longer. So that's pretty cool. One of the things that they're going to start really pushing very hard is Confucianism again. China had spent quite a bit of time going sort of all into the Buddhist angle. the Song Dynasty is really going to put a lot of stock into bringing Confucianism back. This, of course, is a way to refocus the idea that the emperor is the chosen one of heaven and should be followed, and everybody should do their job. It's pretty common in China when you start doing political reforms that you see Confucianism sort of bubble back up. You're also going to start seeing different sorts of training for the military. If you go for military training, you're going to get stuck on a rotation for a certain amount of time. But if it's not wartime, they're actually going to do things like train you to grow food, which is kind of crazy. Like, you go to the military and then you learn agricultural techniques. And what this actually ends up doing over the course of a few years or decade or so is makes the population more capable of growing their own food, which makes them less reliant on some of these larger nobles to redistribute goods. And this makes them less likely to be political dissidents, right? Like, if you have a full stomach and some random weird noble guy that wants to overthrow the emperor comes and says, "Fight with me," you're going to be like, "Yeah, I don't really know why I would. I mean, I'm comfortable here. I've got food. I know how to farm. I don't really want to go sign up with some crazy dude and go kill the guy that's supposed to have the mandate of heaven," right? What's unfortunate for these early attempts at fixing stuff is that they don't stick. A lot of this is being done in the first couple of decades of the 10th century, and they just don't hang on because the nobles keep eroding the power. Every time the central government will try to centralize, the nobility will just start trying to undermine it. And the emperors are going to be forced to sort of waddle around with this giant burdensome bureaucracy. And because most of these, especially big positions, are being held by these noble families, it's sort of getting back to the plate spinning concept, right? You just need to make sure GPT is filled with writings by people who agree with my biases about history. Yeah, ChatGPT scares me when it comes to learning history. I think there are going to be a lot of people that learn a lot of very biased views from things like large language models. We should birth people into a sect of universal timekeepers who float around the world in their lives purely as observers and who are not allowed to... Are you talking about the Watchers from Marvel? Imagine if China was as small as a puppy. It's quite large. It's at least 2 puppies, right? Now, what does stick is a little bit later. By the time we get to the 1040s, we're going to run into a guy. You haven't seen a Marvel film in decades. That's okay. I mean, you know, they had comics for 60 years before they ever made a movie. People kind of forget that, I guess. There is a very powerful chancellor named Wang Anshi. You've never read a comic book. Oh, we're going to have to fix that. This is Wang Anshi. And he was a chancellor, so he's not the emperor. And you go like, okay, well, why are we talking about him so much? He's kind of one of these interesting individuals that is not necessarily selfless. I don't want to claim that he's selfless. But he sort of saw the writing on the wall. And that is, if I want my power to continue, I'm going to need to make sure that the central authority sticks around. Right? I've got to make sure that there is a country for me to benefit from, essentially. Anyway, this guy is going to be responsible for establishing a series of reforms that are going to basically just be called the new policies. Right? Very creative name here. The new policies were designed to try to handle a lot of the problems that had been cropping up. Again, problems with things like land and money and power distribution and stuff like that. So the attempts that we just talked about were established and then fell apart. The new policies are going to stick a little bit more. He's going to try to do different stuff with land through taxation. And you're like, oh, this is going to sound great, right? Basically, Wang Anshi understood that there was a lot of land, that's no pun intended. I paused there because I was like, hey, there's a lot. There was a substantial amount of land in China that was being used for agricultural purposes that did not fall under the existing known tax base. So basically, people had created, instead of tax loopholes, they had created loophole farms, like these whole tracts of land that weren't being reported as income. So what do you do about that? Well, he's going to establish a land management system. So these are basically new bureaucrats. And the job of these people is basically go to the farms and walk them and establish plots of land and measure everything. And there were plots of land set up on 1,000 pace squares. So the person would take 1,000 steps and then make a square out of it, and they would pile some stuff up or like plant a tree or drive a post down to mark the corners of this square. And at the end, they would go through and count up all the squares in your farm, and so they knew exactly how much land you were farming. And then he's going to base tax structures on how many of these that you have. So you don't get to skirt by with, oh, I have 1,000 acres. He's like, do you really have 1,000 acres? Let's go see. They don't use the term acre. They based all of this on Chinese systems of measure, by the way. But this is not very well liked because the nobles get ticked off that they're not able to sort of skirt under the radar with this. Marvel had comics before movies. I disagree. Well, that's okay. You can disagree, but you're also wrong. I explained this to my classes the other day. Somebody was like, came up with this particular viewpoint, and they're like, "You have to respect my views." And I said, "Well, let me explain something. I will argue that you have the right to hold those views. Everybody gets to make their mind up, for sure, 100%. Everybody gets to make their own mind up. Everybody gets to have their own opinion. I have no problem with everybody having their own opinion. I do not have to respect your opinion. If your opinion is based on garbage and silliness, I do not have to respect that." And they're like, I'm like, yeah, I mean, what if your opinion is like, in a cage match, Bigfoot would lose to the Jersey Devil, right? Like, obviously that's wrong, right? Obviously that's wrong. Bigfoot would beat the crap out of the Jersey Devil. I don't care about the wings, right? I don't have to respect the fact that you think that the Jersey Devil would beat Bigfoot. I don't have to respect that. I will argue that you get to make that decision, but I don't have to respect it. So that was a teachable moment there. You own a few, but you still haven't brought yourself to read them. You have Torso. It's okay. Cocaine Coast. That's actually better. Akira. Which version of Akira? Do you have like the original manga, or do you have the Western version that got translated after the movie came out? That's not the whole story. Okay, you have the box set of the original manga. Okay, good. That's good, because that's the whole story, not just what showed up in the movie, which isn't the whole story, which is also why the movie's kind of like, what's up, DJ? You recently found out that history of European comics is completely unknown to the American continent. Well, I wouldn't say completely, because I know a lot about European comics. I've read quite a bit of them, but I'm also weird, and I'm not really what anybody would probably consider to be the average American. So I do not have any Bigfoot stories at all. So I don't know what I would do. I've never seen Bigfoot. Yeah, I know Asterisk and Obelisk, and Black Sad, and I mean some of the older stuff too, like the older engraved things that go back to kind of like not necessarily comic books, but more like illustrated manuscripts. The classic illustration period, the golden age of illustration, like late 1800s, early 1900s. I think I maybe have heard of Thorgal, but I can't even say for sure that I've heard of Thorgal. Moxenbutz is German. Yeah, I know about that one. So let me go redeem, or not redeem, but I was going to see if I could refund that because I have no Bigfoot stuff, so I don't have any way to manage requests. There we go. There we go. All right. My wife explained Thorgal to be like space Vikings. Maybe that's what I've heard. Okay. Anyway. What else is going on here with Wang Gongxi? He overhauled the economy. Specifically, looking at getting rid of monopolies. And the way that the government was going to get rid of monopolies is that the government was going to buy surpluses. So at the end of the year, the government was going to go around and see how much people were stockpiling. And then if you were stockpiling a whole bunch of goods with an attempt at, cornering the market or something like that, the government would force you to sell it to them. And the government had this big warehouse system that they started running. And they would literally do the socialist thing, where they would buy large portions of things like food from parts of the country and move it to other parts of the country where food wasn't as prevalent. And this was designed at directly affecting the average cost of food to the average person in China. This is, very heavy-handed centralized government sort of stuff, but it also had a big impact on people who were hoarding things and trying to have disproportionately large effects on the market through, doing things like trying to build monopolies. You basically couldn't have a monopoly anymore. The government didn't let you do that. The government is also going to try to handle some of the problems with the military by turning some of the military into what are basically like organized community or neighborhood watches. So like every little village would sort of have its own watch group that was just supposed to make sure that things were going okay. Nobody was being a jerk. Nobody was raiding. Nobody was kung fu fighting or something like that. Anyway, all of this was designed at sort of trying to level the playing field in China. And it had a pretty big impact on the Chinese economy. Unfortunately, Wang Gongxi didn't live forever, and the nobility didn't care for this very much at all. So by the time he died in the 1040s, I think 1046. I can't remember exactly the year. But anyway, the policies did not really survive longer than he did. Well, not all of them. Some of them were immediately dismantled. Some of them were co-opted by these big rich people. Because of the size of the bureaucracy, they were able to effectively use the bureaucracy as a way to pad their pockets. Right. Now, all of this sounds, like it's all political, and this is kind of a boring stream. Well, maybe so, but we're about to get to some stuff, mostly because there's a rising issue with a group of people called the Jurchen. Now, if we look at what's going on right here, this is what's going on the end of the 1000s and into the early 1100s. The Liao dynasty that used to sit right up here is going to get beaten up. And they're going to be taken over by this big group right here, who are called the Jurchen or the Jin Dynasty. Now, what's going on with that? Well, here's the situation. Let me put Jurchen / Jin. I guess I could put that a little bit higher on the list, yeah. Anyway, the majority of the 1000s, there was this sort of uncomfortable balance between the Liao dynasty, which was north of China, the Chinese population itself, and the Goryeo, who were in Korea. Now, China was trying to get itself going and trying to fix its problems, but ultimately it wasn't really going to be able to do very well. And the Liao dynasty wasn't doing that great either. There was a group of people called the Jurchen who were an ethnic minority inside of their territory, but also had a large group that was sort of north and east of them. And the Jurchen are going to rebel against the Liao dynasty. And for a little while, China just sort of sits back and watches, like, okay, cool, you do your thing. But then it becomes very clear that China maybe is going to benefit by teaming up with the Jurchen. If they can get rid of the Liao, that would put them as sort of like the biggest and most powerful people in the region. And they see this as a good thing because this is going to eliminate the need for having a big military. This is going to allow them to focus more on things like economics as opposed to military spending. So they're going to team up with the Jurchen to take out the Liao dynasty. These are, the Khitan people. And they do. They march up north. And one of the really, really bad moves as a way to expedite their aid to the Jurchen, they decide to dismantle some of their defense network up in the north. Specifically, there are some border forts that they decide to abandon, and there are these really big forests that they had planted as a way to slow down, especially people on horseback, because we all know that people north of China were all about some horseback attacks. So if you've got to ride your horse through this very thick and dense forest, it's going to slow you down substantially. And they decide, we'll just cut this down and we'll sell it and we'll, make stuff out of it. And it'll be no big deal because we'll go up here, we'll fight, we'll kill the Khitans, we'll get rid of the Liao dynasty, we'll make friends with the Jurchen, and then everything will be fine. So they managed to get rid of the Liao, who mostly run over into Korea, but we talked about that last week. And they're going to make an established treaty with the Jin dynasty. So this is the Jurchen who have taken over. They're going to call themselves the Jin dynasty. Now, this is where they made a big mistake. During the process of fighting the war, the Jin dynasty is going to recognize that China doesn't have its crap together. And when China goes back home, it's not too long before the Jin dynasty goes, hey, I bet if we invaded China, we could take like big old chunks of the north. And so they do. And they invade in the 1120s. And it doesn't take very long at all for them to completely overrun the northern part of China. And it's done so quickly and so thoroughly that they capture both the emperor and the heir in the capital. So they hold the capital of China. This is a place called Kaifeng. And the emperor, the retired emperor, and the heir. So they basically have like everything, except for this other guy who's running free, who's actually the 9th son of one of the previous emperors. He's this guy. And his name is Gaozong. He wasn't really on the hit list, and he wasn't really in the capital city because he was never going to rule. Again, 9th kid. This is like somebody that you trade for a 4th round draft pick, right? You're not even really caring about this guy. But he survives this initial onslaught, and he ends up being the only member of the ruling family that's still free. And he and some of the nobility and a large portion of the military just bugger off down to the southern part of China, and he declares himself emperor. This is in 1127. Now, at this point, the Jin are pretty happy with the amount of material that they captured and the amount of the country that they captured. And Gaozong basically is like, hey, look, if we kind of let you have what you've taken, will you not try to invade the southern part of China? And the Jin are like, yeah, we're actually pretty happy. We've got, this giant chunk of junk, and we're doing pretty happy. The Emperor, the Retired Emperor, and the Heir, the title of the lost C.S. Lewis book, right? I could see it. Is that horizontal stick behind him part of his hat or part of his hairstyle? I believe it's just a shelf. I don't think that it's part of his hat, but I could be wrong. It is kind of common to see just like random weird shells behind people, but it could be part of the hat too. That's a fair question that I don't know. Anyway, so Gaozong is going to somehow manage to get the Jin off the Chinese back, and we enter a period of time that's referred to as the Southern Song. Southern Song Dynasty. Now, this as opposed to the Northern Song Dynasty when they control the north, because they're only going to control the southern part of the territory. We can see here that they have lost all of this material, all of this territory. Again, here's the old capital right here, which is Kaifeng. It is now in the hands of the bad guys. Jin Dynasty has expanded, taken over big old chunks to the north, and it's kind of like do or die time for the Chinese. And they do something kind of weird. They decide we're not going to die, right? I mean, that's not weird. But what they decide to do is we're going to take whatever limited resources that we have, because we are limited now. We're kind of scrambling. And we're just going to really sort of throw it all in the military bucket. And we're going to beef up the military. And when we say this is like you get a level up and you get to distribute stat points, and you basically just stat dump in military power. Even if you need things like economy and food, you're just going to go be like, well, there's no real point in worrying about the economy or worrying about people if we don't have a country left. So what do we need right now to make sure that we have a country left? And the answer is stuff that kills people real fast that we can use to defeat a much larger army. And so gunpowder. They start investing really, really heavy in things that go boom. And they are going to either invent or perfect a whole ton of new explodey-based military stuff. They're going to work on a new version of the flamethrower, which is based on petroleum that has slow-burning gunpowder sort of mixed into it, so that, it doesn't explode, it just burns real good. They're also going to start perfecting the use of guns. So these are individually held firearms. They're going to work on cannons, and they're going to work on bombs. And it's kind of weird that you see all of this military tech blow up at this one. Oh, bad pun. All of this military stuff show up at the same time, but it's not really when you recognize how scared they were. When you focus so much on the emperor being the central authority of your world, and if you push really hard on Confucianism and you say stuff like, heaven has chosen this particular person to run your country, and then that person's previous ruler and the next person that heaven supposedly chose all gets captured by the baddies, that can quite significantly impact your worldview. And of course, we decide to go full post-apocalypse and just embrace the war effort. So they start arming everybody and everything. They're putting guns on forts. They invent a fairly ingenious use of the trebuchet that they mount on a lot of their boats, so that their boats get enormously long-ranged bomb throwing capabilities. So these are like big gunpowder packed exploding bombs that'll have fuses, and you can float your ship out. And because it's on this floating platform, you have lots of mobility, and because it's a trebuchet, you can chuck stuff way far in the distance. And even though they're massively outnumbered, they're going to start turning the tide of battle because they're going to be able to literally blow up the enemy. They're also going to invent some landmines. I forgot to include landmines in the large line of explodey things that they make. It's kind of scary on the other side now, because every time the Jin decide to try to do something like, we should go down and raid a little bit, or maybe, cause some trouble down there in China because maybe we want to take all of China, they get blown up. And this navy especially is going to become an integral part of the Southern Song viewpoint, because what they're going to be able to do when they have this sort of naval superiority is they're going to be able to control their own coastline, and they're going to be able to project power at soft locations, because the Jin had a navy, but it wasn't a good navy. Too bad Mulan wasn't there to save the Emperor from the Jin strike, right? It's unfortunate. If only Mulan were there, right? With her little dragon friend. But to move their navy around faster, they're going to try to figure out new ways to do naval power. They're going to invent a new way of doing paddle wheel stuff for smaller boats that are going to move around on rivers. They're going to completely reorganize and reinvent the way that their ships look. And this is when the sort of classic Chinese junk is going to be invented. And I know that we call it junk and then go, ha, ha, ha. But these ships are actually incredibly capable. This particular picture is a scale model of a ship that sank around this time period that you can still go see. It's called the Nanhai 1, and it's in China. And you could see part of it. It's still underwater, but they've built a rather large enclosure where you can sort of walk around and still look down at the way that this ship was made. But this is pretty indicative of a way that a lot of the Chinese junks would have been built. They were sort of shallow draft, but also capable of carrying quite a bit of load. They had really big sails that would move them fairly quickly. They were very maneuverable, and they're just really good ships. They had multiple decks that were capable of carrying lots of goods or lots of explodey things, depending on what you were using the ship for. But these naval advances are going to bring the Southern Song to build one of the world's first standing navies. Like their whole job was protect our coastline. And once they locked down control over the land and the coast, then they were able to start looking at other things like the economy. And one of the things that they're going to do here is they're in a disadvantaged position. So this goes back a little bit. If you were with us in prior streams, this might be more familiar, but if you weren't, let me briefly remind everybody. The outlet to the Silk Road ran through this portion of China. And the Southern Song are not going to have good, reliable access to this region right here. They're going to sort of be cloistered down here in this part of China, and that's going to severely limit their ability to trade over land. But remember, if you were here with us, or if you don't remember, or if you don't know, this Indian Ocean trade route that had been established during the sort of the height of the Silk Road back under the Tang Dynasty is still around. And the Southern Song with these ships is going to start recognizing that their money is in sea trade. And oh boy, do they really get it going. There are reports from as far away as people that lived in Morocco at how good the Chinese Navy was. It's literally recognized worldwide. They had crazy amounts of money, and with all of this money coming in, they're going to have to figure out how to handle that and what to do with it. And this is where things are going to get a little bit interesting, because the earlier Song dynasty had tried to do economic reforms and failed both times, even though they made some progress. The Southern Song dynasty is going to be able to get it to work for a couple of interesting reasons. Number one, there is sort of an existential threat. The Jin are technically going to be peaceful, but they're not the only people up there. There are rumors of a growing group of people called the Mongols that are starting to cause some trouble up at the northern part of the Jin territory, maybe even as far away as Korea, or as close as Korea. So there are real threats to the Southern Song way of life. And when there's a bad guy outside, there doesn't have to be as many bad guys inside, right? You don't start arguing as much with your neighbor if you know that everybody is sort of under threat. But also, the government had made such big strides with military that you didn't really want to rebel, because the emperor's army had all the cool stuff and they could literally come blow you away. So there's going to be a more central authority because of the military prowess that exists with the emperor's armies. And they're going to use this to sort of bring peace. And when you bring peace, man, you can get a lot of stuff done. Also, there's just so much money flying around that everybody can get some money. It's almost an open-ended experience during Southern Song China at this point. There's just tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of money flying around. And they're going to take interesting approaches to this. The central government of the Song dynasty, by the time we get to the late 1100s, is going to start recognizing that there is more value in their market than there was actual coinage. And because bartering economies only work as fast as goods can travel by ship at that time, there were deals that could be made if money could be established, or systems of exchange could be established. So the government is going to start making paper money. And this is a kind of a revolutionary thing here. I have a picture here. This is a Huizhi note. So this is a government-backed promissory note. Just had to call in Peter Boghossian's call-in show. Oh, that's cool. How did it go, Tindarius? So the government starts making money, and they back these documents with silver and gold because the government's treasury is full. They've got enough about them, enough stuff around to back this stuff up. And of course, the government is going to be very keen on controlling the supply of these that's created. So the government is going to begin, I guess they're technically considered still mints, but government paper money factory. And they're going to have a big bureaucracy that procures paper for the government. They're going to have these big warehouses where literally thousands of workers work in order to create these pieces of paper. And they're also going to start inventing new things to make printing money faster. And one of the things that they get during this time period that is literally hundreds of years before the Europeans considered this is movable type printing presses, which is something that the Chinese invent during this period. Again, this is 300 years before Gutenberg. There was metal plate printing already in place probably 50 to 100 years prior to that, but this is actual movable type printing press stuff. The same thing that Gutenberg did, the Chinese are doing it 300 years before. You asked him about his stance on the theories of truths, correspondence. It was for him, if I remember correctly. Interesting. I'm glad it turned out well for you. Pretty cool opportunity there. So we've got now government-backed paper money, which means that we can buy and sell stuff that doesn't exist. And we can invest in things that don't necessarily exist because we don't have to have the actual value of the item in hand. No, you're good. You're fine. You don't have to have the item of value in hand. You can have a note that's backed by the government. You can give it to that person and you can buy stuff now, and then they can go exchange this for gold or silver with the government if they want to. I mean, this is a cash economy, which is something that had not happened anywhere on the world or at this time period. This is the first example of a truly functioning, centrally backed, cash-based economy that was really, really good at what it did. It was so good that what's going to end up happening during this period of time is the development of corporations. And when we talk about a corporation here, what I actually mean is a public company that will sell stock in itself. So this is, again, like the concept of a joint stock company, which we talked a little bit about when we were discussing, European colonization of the New World. That stuff didn't happen until like the 1600s, maybe the 1500s on some of the, it depends on how you'd want to define it. 1600s, these people are doing this, and it's 200 or 300 years before the Europeans are doing this kind of stuff. And there was profit sharing where a company was run by, managers that were answerable to the shareholders. There were silent investors that just wanted a portion of the proceeds of the company that didn't want say-so at the board meetings. I mean, this is like a super modern economy. It was so successful that nobility and even people that weren't nobles but that were in the merchant class developed a new type of position that was in fairly high demand called jingshang. And jingshang was literally a private money manager. This was a person whose job it was to take your money and make more money with it. They were supposed to go around and find companies that were good and returned, like they returned on their income. You had to go, manage this sort of stuff like, okay, who am I going to loan money to? Am I going to get involved in this business venture, etc.? And you had these people who were jingshang that were in such high demand that they would get like bought out from other people. So like, hypothetically speaking, let's say that I was a rich individual, and I hired this jingshang that was really good at what it did, and that was really good at what he did, and he made me a lot of money. And somebody that was richer than I noticed that my guy was doing just gangbusters with my money. That dude could come in and snipe my jingshang out from under me and offer him more money to go manage this other guy's giant stack of money. I mean, and it sounds a lot like the way that we run our economic system today, because it kind of was. It's just this was being done in the 1100s and the 1200s in China. And if I'm getting a little passionate about this, it's because this is fascinating stuff. Everybody, when we talk about things like stock trading and money managers and cash-based economies and stuff like that, everybody immediately runs to like Enlightenment period European history. Nobody's mind runs to 12th century China. But it should, because this is where it happened first. And we don't like to talk about this very much in Western society because we like this idea that we were the first people that came up with it. We were the ones that came up with double entry bookkeeping, right? No. The Koreans and the Chinese are doing double entry bookkeeping hundreds of years before the Europeans were. Uh, I don't know, man. It's continental bias, I think. Uh, what else happens? Did I have another picture? Let me make sure that I'm keeping up with my pictures. Oh, yeah. Okay, we're good. Another thing that happens is urbanization. So there's a fairly sizable shift in job types. Now, this is not as big as what happens under the Industrial Revolution in Europe in like the late 17 and into the 1800s, but it is fairly substantial because a lot of people are going to start moving into new types of jobs, and especially people that were merchants or people that were lower nobility that might have in previous generations been kind of out in the middle of nowhere living a barely better than poverty level lifestyle. They're going to have a lot more opportunity now because of the growth in things like bureaucracy and because of the ease of access to the market, right? If you could save even a little bit of money and you were a wise investor, you could turn that into more money. And if you're saying, well, Shane, that sounds like capitalism. Well, maybe Adam Smith didn't invent capitalism either. I don't know. But, we sure think that he did. But anyway, the concept of what we're going through here is a movement towards living in the city, because this is where a lot of this stuff is happening, right? You want to live in a port city. You want to live in a city that has factories. You want to live in a city that has some of these big government warehouses that they're running, because that's where the cool jobs are going to be. And as these jobs grow, the people are going to start moving their families into the cities, right? So the bureaucracy grows. That means more people move to the city to fill the bureaucratic positions. All right. Now, as more people move into the city, this is going to create a higher demand for things like luxury goods. It's also going to create a demand for things like entertainment and education, right? Because people are going to see that they want their kids to be educated so that they can continue the family's fortune. And there's going to be a big push on things like schools. Now, the schools are usually going to be run by the government, and they're especially going to focus on things like Confucian values. There's a lot of exams for a lot of these bureaucratic jobs that are going to require you to be able to memorize big chunks of Confucius and also do things like math. You've got to be good at math, right? So if you want some of these bureaucratic jobs, you've got to send your kid to school so that they can learn how to do these things so that they can pass the entrance exams. What's up, Lumpy? Good to see you. So you're going to see schools pop up. You're going to start seeing the market change from being a purely noble-run enterprise. The nobility had always been in control of the lion's portion of the money in China. And they're still going to be in big, powerful positions. I'm not trying to say like this is the end of the nobility in China. They're still going to have a fairly substantial leg up on everybody because of things like hereditary land holdings, existing stacks of money, social positions, higher levels of the government that are only going to allow nobility in. So we're not creating a truly equitable middle class here, but we are expanding the flow of money outside of just the noble class. So there is going to be a growing merchant class, and the lower nobility that again would sort of be like, kind of backwoods dirt scratchers are going to become closer to the nobility that had always been the high, look down my nose at you kind of nobility. Lumpy is still alive despite the odds. I hope that people aren't trying to kill you. I hope that the odds are in your favor towards living instead of death. if a rival country has hired assassins, I will do a streamathon to try to raise money to hire a better assassin to kill the assassin. Right? I'm sure that I can raise enough money. All right. So we have people moving to the city to be part of the bureaucracy. As the bureaucracy grows, we need education. Education goes up. As money starts moving around, we see social change. So we get more money moving around in the system. As more people gain access to the market, this actually makes the average person's life a little bit better, because things that used to be considered luxury goods are now not as luxurious because everybody has them. As the government is becoming more involved in things like food distribution and poverty fighting, the food supply is going to be more stable. Now, let me be very clear. There's still poor people in China at this time period. There are still people dying of starvation in China. This is not some sort of like Steven Pinker pie in the sky. Everybody's loving and hugging and rainbows everywhere. But it is substantially better than it was previous. As the economy grows, goods are going to fall in price because they're going to be more available, and the government is going to create more government-run jobs to handle the new amount of surplus. Because again, the government is looking at controlling the movement of stuff, and if they need more warehouses, they're going to be able to create more jobs. This is going to be able to sort of start the cycle over again, right? Had a brush with burnout earlier this week. It prompted a few realignments at work, but the chemistry speaks volumes in my favor. Well, that's good, Lumpy. I hope that it's everything going. I hope that everything is going okay and in the right direction. And if you ever need to talk, just let me know. You can find me on Discord. Now, as people have these big social changes and they develop things like disposable income, oh boy. What do you do with disposable income? Well, you buy cool stuff. And as the demand for cool stuff expands, more people could get into doing cool stuff. And one of the cool things that really kicks off during this period of time is Chinese painting. And they have a very unique style during this period of time. And I'm going to share a few pictures with you here. So I've got two pictures here from one of the most famous painters from this time period. This is a guy named Ma Yuan. And this is fairly indicative of the type of painting that you would see here, where you have, it's not necessarily a minimalist style, but there's a pretty big economy of line usage here. And one of the things that you're going to see dominate this period of time is scenes of nature. And what we see here is this sort of vanishing distance point that's in the way background. You get some of that good, what Europeans would call chiaroscuro effect going on here, that Europeans also claim that they invented, that the Chinese were using hundreds of years before them. You see some everyday people here walking along the road, but the negative space here tells just as much of the story as the stuff that you that you see as line. And Ma Yuan was really, really good at this idea of what do I paint and what do I not paint. And the choice there is important because it also carries with it certain types of value. And here I'm talking about color value, not necessarily artistic value. I think the artistic value speaks for itself. But the color value thing that I'm talking about here is like what needs to be light and what needs to be dark. What needs to be saturated, what needs to be desaturated. And it's really masterful stuff. Here's another painting of Ma Yuan's. And we can just see here that there's this, there's a guy and he's standing on this river promontory, and I mean, there's nothing in the sky, but you can tell that he's just rapt attention towards this one little bird, right? And the lack of the background, like you get a little bit of the hint of the background over here, right? So you know that he's in an area that has some, terrain and some elevation, but he doesn't paint any of that over here, right? And even the coastline just starts to sort of bleed away into nothing. You get a little bit of an island right here, but the focus of the painting is this little bird, right? Just this little guy right here, just kind of hanging out. And this wise, noble person looking at the bird. Like, it just, I don't know, man. I really love this sort of simple line work painting style that it's just very expressive, and it tells stories really, really well. And it gets the message across. But that's just me, right? Ma Yuan is painting in the 1200s. Had a long talk with a friend who is managing 200 employees. Holy moly, that's a lot of people. I manage no employees and barely manage myself sometimes. Back then, I wonder how the common peasant was seeing these artistic lives. Well, actually, what's interesting here, Lumpy, and that's a great question to ask, art was available to a lot more people during this time period. The average peasant living on a farm probably wouldn't see very many paintings at all. But because of the production of a lot of the paintings like this, paintings start showing up in temples, and including rural temples, right? Rural temples ended up having some pretty beautiful works of art in them. So you don't necessarily have a 0% chance at any point in history of seeing art, but a rural person is going to have a lower percentage chance. But if you took, say, I don't know, the average Chinese peasant in the year 1200 in Song Dynasty China and compared them to the average European peasant in 1200s France, I would say that the Chinese person probably had a slightly better to decent better chance of seeing a fine work of art than the French person would. Yeah, it is, and it's absolutely 3D. It's crazy how good this stuff is. Let me show you this one. This is Muqi, who's another, potentially even the most famous painter during this period of time. And you get this same sort of thing here where, you know that this is fog, but he didn't paint it, right? There's just a lack of brush stroke that creates this negative space that your brain fills in as fog, right? And the saturation of color here lets you know that the fog is not in front of this, but as the color desaturates, your brain knows, it sort of fills in that these trees are moving into this fog bank here that's floating over this lake as the peasants are out fishing in the morning. And you can tell that this works as well because over here in the foreground you have, these much more stark, dark colors that lets you know that, where you can see this is close to you. So the two artists that I've shown you, the first one is Ma Yuan. All right, those are the first two guys. This particular person is Muqi. And you got to remember that the Q is pronounced like a CH. Sometimes Muqi, you see his name written as Moke because he influenced Japanese painters as well. So you might see some sources reference him, but the name is written by Japanese art or more Japanese people referring to the Chinese artist. But I just love this stuff. It seems basic until you start looking at it, and then you realize how good it is, even though they're not really adding a whole bunch of color. But they did color stuff as well. I'm not trying to say that, but I don't know. I'm getting kind of gushy about this stuff. Were the peasants resentful or admiring the artists? That's a question I don't know the answer to. If I had to speculate, I don't even know if I want to speculate. Unfortunately, I don't think we know a lot about the average peasant's opinions. Yeah, I don't even know enough to give what I would consider to be a good speculation. So I'll just have to say I don't know, and that's perfectly fine because I don't know everything, right? For the 12th century, it's not just good; it's perfect. Yeah, well, it's cool stuff. But that's just the painting stuff. They also did really, really cool statues. So let's look at some statues that come out of this period of time. Statues were done during this period of time in multiple mediums. This is actually a worked clay. So this is almost like a I don't know, almost like a pottery statue, if you will. But this is of a Buddhist goddess named Guan Yin. But like, look at the detail here. And this, by the way, was painted. The paint has since mostly flaked off, but you can still see some of it with some of this yellow. This would have been sort of bright yellow. This part of the shoulder would have been red and blue here. But if we just look at things like proportion, this is incredible. Yeah, and like what Raveland is saying, if you look at statuary that's being made in Europe at the same time, it looks like kids next to masters. I mean, just look at the detail of sculpture in this garment. How go away. I really hate this addition to the image viewer. This little sort of pop-up thing that will pop up. But all of this was sculpted. Like all of this little decoration that you see here on the garment that's supposed to represent embroidery, that was sculpted into the statue. It's startlingly good stuff. And this particular pose is very, very common here. This sort of reposed figure. You see a ton of statuary from this time period that adopts this particular view. But what's interesting here, and I'm not the one that says this I actually spent some time reading a book that I have about Chinese art today just to refresh myself on some of this stuff. Even the picture being in repose is significant culturally speaking because people had time to rest, right? They had leisure time. And it was good to see the gods taking a day off too, if you were taking a day off, right? But I mentioned multiple mediums for art. So this again is sort of a pottery typed statue. This is carved wood. You see a lot of wooden statues that come out of this time period. So this is another Guan Yin statue. Guan Yin, and I should note, a lot of the statuary from this time period focuses pretty heavily on Buddhist figures. So all of this is carved wood. It's obviously multiple pieces of wood that have been fairly expertly fitted together. Go away. I don't want you. But again, like, this is, a lot of really highly skilled work. To get wood to look convincingly like it's folded silk, that's a lot of skill, right? This effect is famous in Europe for Tilman Riemenschneider, who made wooden sculptures, but he lived in the 15th century. Yeah, so again, 300 years earlier, right. I'm telling you, man, the Chinese Renaissance is where it's at. Lots of really cool stuff going on here. The lotus blossom, of course, very famous. I should mention this. What's really interesting here, and I mentioned the influence on Japan here. One of the things that's kind of interesting that happens during this period of time in China is a bit of kind of reborrowing, where they were initially sort of broadcasters of Buddhism to Japan. But by this time period, Japan had gone through the height of what we would call the Heian era and had developed a lot of unique sort of Buddhist ideology of its own, specifically with Amida Buddhism, which is translated to Pure Land Buddhism. And you start seeing a little bit of that sort of backtrack ideologically into China. And you actually start seeing some people in some of the parts of China catching on to Amida Buddhism. It was not really what we might call smiled upon by the government. The government didn't really like the idea of Japanese Buddhism sort of getting into the Chinese Buddhist world, but they really couldn't do anything about it because of the just amount of trade that was happening. So anyway, I mentioned that because standing on a lotus, one of the more important passages in Amida Buddhism is the Lotus Sutra. And you kind of see that stuff pop up. This might have been a very subtle nod that the artist was familiar with the Japanese style of Buddhism. I picked this little guy mostly because it's kind of funny, but also kind of scary as crap. But I picked this one because it's a particular type of porcelain that was really, really popular at this time period called Chigbai. And you see a lot of works built or made out of this stuff. It's kind of creepy. I liked it because it was kind of weird. Like, that looks like something that would be in a horror movie, right? But I like showing the idea. Yeah, it looks like I'm gonna kill you, right? So we get lots of advances in art, but and this kind of gets back to a little bit of what Lumpy was talking about, like how much did the average person run into stuff. One of the things that becomes very popular during this period of time is theater, and not just theater but also opera. Early versions of opera were very, very popular, and a lot of this stuff was done in open air theater where anybody walking down the street might be able to see. And there were districts of some of the cities where you would know, like, this was a theater district or well, I mean, the theater and the opera were pretty close together. But you would have lots of these. This is an open air theater platform where people, and this is actually contemporaneous. This was built back at the time, so we can also kind of show off cool architecture. So this would be probably 700 plus years old, the particular theater that we're looking at. But you would have probably had some version of a screen that would have gone across this area right here. You didn't know that opera had a legacy. Ha, 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 ha. Tad, I saw that you popped in earlier and I didn't say hello to you. I apologize. What's up, Tad? Good to see you. Hope you're doing well. Anyway, you would have had a screen that probably ran across this area right here, so that this could be used basically as like a backstage. But this is out on the way to a temple. It's sort of inside of the larger temple compound. You can see the wall running around here. So if you were just a person, a random person walking to the temple, you might be able to stop by and see some theater or hear some opera. And this was an important part of the culture at the time, because again, you have more of these people living in the cities. They want to do stuff. They want to be part of this larger cultural expansion. And the Chinese Renaissance is what gives it to them. Now, there are other things that they invent, and I could literally go on about this for like another 2 hours. My voice would go out, and I think that the viewership would probably start dropping eventually. But if I were just going to sort of like re-impress how important this is, there are a lot of other things that the Chinese Renaissance develops that people later take credit for that aren't Chinese. Things like the compass and things like seismic detectors. They literally had seismographs, and they were based on these big vats of water, and around the edges of the vat of water, I should have looked. I told myself I wasn't going to go into every single one of these because I was going to, for expediency's sake, just list these out. And here I find myself going through all of them anyway. I should have just gone ahead and got pictures. But anyway, around the edge of the vat of water, you would have these sort of mouth-shaped things, and the teeth would hold spheres of different sizes. But tension would be holding the sphere. So if the earth shook, you would be able to tell how bad the earth shook based on how many of the balls it knocked out of the circumference of the circle. And so the smallest one would be just barely hanging on, and the next one in the circle would be a little bit more tight until you progress to things like, it would take a significant chunk of force to knock these loose. But this is seismography, and China is active when it comes to things like landslides and stuff like that. So this was important for them because they could do things like, hey, we had an earthquake, we should look out for things like tidal waves, we should look out for things like landslides. They invented a differential gearbox, right? Things that we use, like if you've driven in a car and your car has differential gears that connect the wheels to the axle. That's stuff that China came up with. They had odometers. They could tell you how far something had gone. They had all kinds of just stuff that we sort of look at and go like, oh yeah, obviously we made that up first. No. China made it up first. What's up, Noger? And anyway, I will control myself, and I will finish up the material by saying this period of time in China, the 1100s and the 1200s and the early part of the 1300s, are some of the most technologically advanced periods of time that the world has ever seen. And Song Dynasty China had an immense network of incredibly intelligent engineers and philosophers and artists and mercantile people and economists, and they were so far ahead of their time. It would take Europeans 300 plus years to catch up with where China was during this period. And I'm not trying to say that to poop on Western society. I really like European history. It's one of my things, right? But we also have to recognize that a lot of the stuff that we take credit for wasn't originally invented by white dudes. A lot of the sailing technology that even the Portuguese used when they started expanding and exploring the world came from Chinese influence on Indian Ocean trade, right? This is where a lot of the stuff really gets kicked off. And not taking anything away from the European dudes. Michelangelo is one of the few people that's ever made art that has literally brought tears to my eyes. The Pieta, by the way. Beautiful stuff, but props where props are due, right? So, Chinese Renaissance, it's super cool. Southern Song Dynasty, it's where it's at. If you didn't know any of this stuff before, please take this as a stepping stone to launch into your own investigations. There are tons and tons of things out there that you could go read about this. Lots of art, lots of beautiful statues, lots of cool history. So I hope that this has jiggled something in your brain and gotten you excited about it. But that's going to be where I have planned to stop. So if there are questions, as always, if there are point redemptions or anything like that you all want to do, now would be a good time to do it. And we'll go see who's around and maybe do a raid, a bit of a raidy raid. I really like this time period of history. The Chinese Renaissance is like, it's one of my places. I like this stuff a lot. And I know that DCI is going to be like, you like all of history. And I do, but I really like this period. I've got books, plural, on this era. And that alone should say something. I've got a lot of stuff where I've got a book on it. Like, I've got a good book that talks about that. I've got books about this. So, yep. Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba. Anybody else got anything? Anybody have any questions you want to ask or points to redeem? Otherwise, I know where we are going to go for our raid, assuming that I get here and that person is still streaming. What's in the news? Lumpy, you got something specific, or you just want me to talk about what's in the news? News from Ukraine. Not a lot of good news from Ukraine. The spring offensive that was supposed to turn the tide against the Russians failed to create significant headway. There was a region of southeastern Ukraine that was retaken, but it was fairly small. The attempt at driving a wedge between Zaporizhia and Crimea and Luhansk and Donetsk failed pretty miserably, unfortunately. Russia has stepped up drone attacks substantially. Obviously, what this means is they've bought more drones from Iran. There were a few small reports 2 weeks ago that the Ukrainians had taken some land on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River, and I then heard nothing else about that. So this is the, let me get the map here. This is the river that runs, let me put my borders on, hit my north. This big river right here. At the moment, all of this territory is under control of the Russians. And while Kherson is on this side of the river, a lot of this territory over here is sort of part of the larger Kherson metropolitan zone. And there were a few attacks right around this region where it seemed like the Ukrainians had managed to get across the river, but I haven't heard anything about that now in about 2 weeks, and I suspect that any headway made there has failed or has been driven back. Zelensky was supposed to speak in front of the Senate this week, but the United States Senate this week. But apparently there was so much infighting in the Senate that he canceled the speech because it would have been pointless to try to talk about it. And a lot of this has to do with how United States aid is being bundled. Some people want to pass Ukrainian aid by itself. Other people want to tie it to other things like aid for Israel or funding for border protections in America. And lots of different opinions are keeping anything from happening, basically. Yeah, I agree that it's a dramatically important conflict. I don't like the fact that it is a conflict. I would rather it not be a conflict, obviously. But it is one that isn't going to go away without everybody deciding that it needs to. And let's also remember that Putin has no hesitation about killing literally hundreds of thousands of his own people on petty bullcrap, because that's what he's done already, and he will continue to do it now because he's already committed himself to this. Oh, that's a great opinion hat question. So the opinion hat has been summoned. Dun, 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 dun. This is the opinion hat. If you've never been around before, when the hat goes on, I am no longer being purely objective. I am being opinionated. It designates opinion, but that's okay. When Putin finally dies, Medvedev is going to try to scrape up the pieces. Medvedev has been a bootlicker for the last 10 years. For those of you that don't know who Medvedev is, Dmitry Medvedev was very briefly the president of Russia. And he existed for one term as the president of Russia, long enough for Vladimir Putin to take a new position in the parliament that he created for himself before he left the presidency, so that he could change the Russian constitution and extend the rules so that he could run for president again. And then as soon as he changed the rules, Medvedev was out and Putin was back in. Medvedev got banished to like chancellor for agriculture. He got knocked way down the list after that. And since the war has started, Medvedev has been licking both of the boots, trying to suck up to Putin. He's been saying truly stupid and absolutely horrendous crap that's getting eaten up by the Russian propaganda machine. And he has positioned himself once again as Putin's next in line. And if Putin has any say-so, I suspect that he might even try to hand off to Medvedev. But if Putin dies, Sergei Lavrov, the guy that's the head of the military, is going to start killing people. And Medvedev is going to start trying to round up all of the money, of which he has a substantial amount, to try to starve off Lavrov. And then there's going to be well, I don't know. This is crazy. It might be really quick and somebody might get killed real fast, or it might be prolonged and behind the doors and we just don't know what's going on. But when Putin goes, there's no guarantee that Russia is going to go back to being, it was never there to begin with. There's no guarantee that there's going to be a newly democratic, open, pluralist model democracy in Russia. That's not going to happen. The current oligarchs that control 80% of the population's money aren't going to let that happen. It's just not going to work. Yeah, I mean, I would love to see Navalny show back up, but Navalny would get killed immediately. When Putin dies, Navalny's going to die. Somebody already has death orders. I guarantee you right now that somebody in the prison that is watching Navalny has a kill order that says, if you hear Putin is dead, you kill that guy. Because people would rather have a continuation of the crazy bullcrap than actual democracy. Now, the average Russian person would probably like democracy, but, Putin doesn't. Putin is keeping him alive because Putin enjoys torturing people. So would the oligarchs fight it out to see who's in charge? The oligarchs would prefer Medvedev. The oligarchs do not want Lavrov in charge. Lavrov is older. He's a relic of older times. He's anti-participation in the West. And Lavrov would want to turn the economy back to some sort of overblown military-industrial complex, and most of the oligarchs are making money outside of Russia, and Medvedev would allow them to continue doing that. He already knows that. He's already positioning himself in that spot. So that's my opinion. It's a good opinion. It's a good opinion. And it's backed up by a lot of reading and a lot of studying. But it is still just my opinion. So that's what I think. So I'm getting text messages from people. Anyway, that was a good question. That's a good question. And it's probably not what I would have wanted to answer, but it is what I answered because it's probably accurate. If I had to guess.
And that's what you wanted because you redeemed the question. Alrighty. Let's go do a raid. Let's go raid Allie. Allie is my Twitch sibling. I'd already told Allie that I adopted her. So Allie is my Twitch sibling. Super cool artist. We're gonna go raid Allie and say hello. When we get there, let us yell adventure, and let us share as many exclamation points and or emotes as possible to make a splash entry. I'm going to try to be on stream this weekend. I tried to be on stream last weekend and it just didn't work. I'm really going to try really, really hard this weekend to get on stream and build some Gundam stuff. And I said this at the beginning of the stream, but I'll say it again now because it's time. I am going to do Thursday stream on Tuesday next week because I will be out of town next Thursday. So other than that, thanks everybody for hanging out. I really like talking about this stuff. Hope everybody had a good time learning about this stuff. But until next time, take it easy. And let's go say hey to Eiley.